Michigan, land of lakes, forests, and 33 people who vanished into thin air. No witnesses, no footprints, just silence. From crowded malls to rural highways, from children who never made it to school to mothers who stepped outside and were never seen again, these are not ghost stories, they're real, and they remain unsolved. Some cases go back decades, others happened last year. All of them, still open, still cold, still waiting. This isn't just a list, it's a map of vanishing points. Welcome to 33 Michigan Missing People Mysteries That Cannot Be Explained. Before we dive in, if you're into true crime, unsolved mysteries, and stories that dig deeper than headlines, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what's next. It is the Be Unsolved hesitation. Also, we want to know, where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Drop it in the comments, because these stories hit different at 3 a.m. Jimmy Hoffa, 1975, Bloomfield, TWP. There are few names in American lore that echo louder than Jimmy Hoffa, a labor titan, a Union bulldog, a backroom legend whose handshake could make or end a career. But in the late summer of 1975, Hoffa didn't just walk out of a restaurant in Bloomfield Township. He exited the stage of history, and he never returned. The 30th of July was hot, the kind of sticky Michigan afternoon where everything feels off by half a beat. Hoffa had told his wife, Josephine, he was meeting two men at the Match's Red Fox restaurant, Anthony Giacoloni and Anthony Provenzano, both mobsters, both allegedly tied to prior threats and tensions with Hoffa. At 2:15 p.m., Hoffa called home. No one picked up. By 2:45, he was pacing the parking lot, frustrated, calling his friend Louis Linteau from a payphone. They stood me up. That was the last confirmed sighting. His car, a green Pontiac Grand Ville, was found later, unlocked, keys in the ignition. But Jimmy Hoffa? Gone. No witnesses, no struggle, no blood, just gone. And here's the part that makes this more than just a high-profile vanishing act. Over the next 5 decades, Hoffa's disappearance became less of a case and more of a national riddle. A scavenger hunt without a map. Everyone had a theory. He was buried under Giant Stadium. No crushed in a car and shipped to Japan. No fed to alligators in Florida. Every few years, the FBI would show up with shovels and sonar, tearing up fields, garages, even horse barns. Nothing. Not a bone. Not a button. What's even more maddening is how close the authorities got, yet never close enough. Investigators suspected the mob silenced Hoffa to keep him from regaining control of the Teamsters Union and disrupting their very lucrative deals. But suspects lawyered up. Key players died. Memories faded. Allegiances evaporated like footprints in fresh snow. And still, the myth of Jimmy Hoffa only grew. For many, the name became shorthand for the unsolvable. The idea that a man could be this famous, this powerful, and still disappear completely was both terrifying and oddly comforting. It meant the world had edges dark, hidden corners even the brightest spotlight couldn't reach. But here's a kicker. The FBI still lists Hoffa as an active missing person case. That's right. Nearly half a century later, his file is still open. Agents still field tips. Occasionally, they still dig. As recently as 2022, a tip led them to a landfill in Jersey. Another dead end. Another layer of mystery added to the legend. What makes Hoffa's case truly extreme isn't just the decades-long failure to find his remains. It's that his vanishing point sits at the intersection of labor history, organized crime, government surveillance, and Americana itself. He wasn't just a man. He was a force of nature. And when a force like that disappears, it leaves a pressure vacuum behind a silence too loud to ignore. This isn't a simple missing person case. It's a permanent question mark. A riddle wrapped in cement and dumped who knows where. And it set the tone for every cold case that came after. Hoffa became the benchmark for high-stakes disappearances. If he could vanish without a trace, anyone could. But let's not lose ourselves completely in the mob fog. Behind the mythology was a real man, a husband, a father, someone whose family never got closure. Josephine Hoffa died 2 years after her husband vanished, never knowing what happened. And the rest of the Hoffa family? Still waiting, still wondering. Still haunted by a lunch meeting that turned into an American legend. And as the years rolled on and the world changed around the shadow of his name, that empty parking lot in Bloomfield Township remained the last known stage where Jimmy Hoffa played his final scene. But if you thought that case was chilling, wait until you hear about a woman whose car was found running on the side of I-96. Purse, shoes, everything inside except her. Paige Renkoski, 1990, I-96, near Fowlerville. The afternoon of May 24, 1990, seemed unremarkable in southern Michigan. The sun was out. The traffic on I-96 hummed along like usual. But just outside Fowlerville, something deeply wrong was unfolding on the side of the highway. It would leave investigators baffled, witnesses uneasy, and an entire state asking how a woman could simply vanish into daylight. Paige Renkoski was 30 years old, a substitute teacher, a calm, kind presence. That morning, she dropped off her mother at Detroit Metro Airport and was making the quiet drive back home to Okemos. Nothing about her day suggested she wouldn't make it. She was dressed casually, sipping a drink, and according to people who saw her earlier that day, she seemed perfectly fine. But by 3 p.m., her car, a 1986 Oldsmobile Cutlass Calais, was spotted idling on the shoulder of the highway. Still running, driver's door open. Inside, her purse, wallet, shoes, even her cigarettes, all untouched, like she had just stepped out for a moment. Only she didn't come back. Multiple passing motorists said they saw a woman matching Paige's description talking to 2 men near a maroon minivan or a burgundy car. Some thought the conversation looked heated. Others didn't think much of it at the time, just a woman having car trouble, maybe getting help. But whatever happened in those few minutes on the shoulder of I-96 left no visible signs of a struggle, no tire tracks skidding away, no trace of Paige Renkoski ever again. The scene itself felt almost staged in its stillness. The radio was playing. Her soda cup was still cold. The ignition was on. A witness described seeing her standing barefoot on the shoulder. And then, nothing. What came next was a scramble for answers. State police launched an investigation immediately. Helicopters scanned the surrounding fields. Search parties walked shoulder to shoulder through brush, ditches, and wooded areas nearby. A psychic was even consulted, which tells you just how fast traditional leads dried up. In the weeks that followed, tips poured in. Over 500 leads. Everyone chased. None led to her. Some speculated she was abducted by someone she knew. Others insisted it was a random act by strangers. There were even theories that she had staged her own disappearance, quickly ruled out by those who knew her. Paige had no history of mental health crises. No debts, no apparent secrets. She had plans. She had people expecting her home. She wasn't the type to vanish on purpose. Years passed. Billboards went up. The Renkoski family refused to give up. In fact, her mother, Ardis, became a tireless advocate for missing persons cases across Michigan, turning personal grief into public activism. She kept the case in the news, pushed for changes to how law enforcement handles adult disappearances. Paige's face, soft smile, wide eyes became a symbol of what was lost and what might still be found. Investigators returned to the scene multiple times over the decades. One of the most promising leads came in 2009, when authorities used ground-penetrating radar to examine farmland near the original search area. They found anomalies underground, unusual spots that could suggest disturbed soil. But after digging, they found only old farm debris. No body, no sign of Paige. To this day, Her car remains one of the most chilling clues ever left behind in a Michigan mystery, because it feels too perfect, too deliberate. The placement of her items, the way nothing was taken, not even her purse. There's a psychological violence in that silence, like someone erased her from the scene without ever touching a thing. And then there's the strange detail that, in a pre-cell phone world, she had access to payphones at nearby rest stops but never used them. No calls were made from her car, no distress signals. It was as if whatever happened instantly. By the 25th anniversary of her disappearance, the case had become one of Michigan's most iconic unsolved mysteries. Documentaries covered it, cold case units reopened it, and yet the answers never came. It's not just the lack of evidence that makes this case extreme, it's the emotional geography of it. The highway, the open air, the bright daylight. This wasn't a dark alley or an abandoned road. This was a visible, populated stretch of interstate. And still, no one knows what happened in those final minutes Paige Renkoski was seen. Her case taught investigators a brutal lesson. You don't need a remote location or the cover of night to make someone disappear. Sometimes, all it takes is a brief pause on the shoulder of the road, and the right kind of predator. But if Paige's story leaves a chill in your chest, brace yourself, because our next mystery involves 3 young brothers who vanished over Thanksgiving weekend, all at once, and no one's seen them since. 2 stories in, and we've barely scratched the surface. If you're still here, you're exactly the kind of person this channel was made for. So, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. And while you're here, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it? Because something about these stories just hits different when the world outside is quiet. Danielle Stislicki, 2016, Farmington Hills, Southfield. By all outward appearances, Danielle Stislicki had a solid life. She was 28 years old, independent, employed, and grounded in the routines of suburban Michigan. On the surface, everything tracked. She worked a 9-to-5 job at a MetLife office in Southfield. She had plans to meet a friend for dinner the evening of the 2nd of December, 2016. She lived alone in a modest apartment in Farmington Hills. She was the kind of person who texted if she was running late and returned calls quickly. So when Danielle didn't show up for dinner that night and didn't answer her phone, alarm bells started ringing early. By the next morning, the bells were sirens. Her Jeep Renegade was found parked just outside her apartment, locked. Her purse was inside, her keys and wallet were missing. Her phone, however, was turned off. And the one thing that made everyone stop cold? Danielle's work ID badge, still clipped to her lanyard, abandoned. From the beginning, this case didn't feel like a typical disappearance. There was no sign of forced entry at her apartment. No indication she had packed or left voluntarily. The last confirmed sighting of her was when she left her job around 5 p.m. Witnesses say she walked to her car in the company parking lot and drove off. She was supposed to head straight home, change clothes, and then meet her friend for dinner. That never happened. Her phone pinged once near her apartment complex shortly after she left work. Then, silence. In the days that followed, her face was everywhere. Local news broadcasts, social media, missing posters taped to street signs and coffee shop windows. Farmington Hills Police conducted one of the most extensive missing person investigations in Michigan history. Search dogs, aerial surveillance, data forensics, building sweeps, nothing. But quietly, investigators were already zeroing in on someone. Floyd Galloway Jr., a former security guard at the building where Danielle worked. She knew him, spoke to him often, trusted him enough to make small talk on her way in and out of the office. Galloway lived near where her phone last pinged, and here's where things start to spiral into the surreal. A few months earlier, Galloway had been accused of attacking another woman while she was jogging through a park in nearby Livonia. That woman had escaped. He eventually pled guilty in that case and was sentenced to prison. During that investigation, Detectives began drawing lines between Galloway and Danielle, overlapping location data, shared routines, and unsettling patterns. In 2019, 3 years after Danielle vanished, Galloway was officially charged with her murder. The prosecutors made their case even without a body. They argued that he lured her to his house, likely under false pretenses, and something irreversible happened. They pointed to scratches found on Galloway's chest days after her disappearance. They presented evidence that her DNA had been recovered from a mattress in his home. It was damning. But for all that, there remains one brutal truth. Danielle Stislicki's body has never been found. This is where the case moves beyond tragedy and into something colder. Because even with a conviction in sight, even with the scales of justice tilting toward accountability, there's still a massive, gaping wound at the center of this story. Where is Danielle? For her family, that's the question that haunts them most. Her parents have been vocal from the start. Her mother, Anne Stislicki, became a public advocate for families of the missing. She lobbied for legislative reforms, gave interviews, and begged for the one thing she could never manufacture: a location. And here's the thing about unresolved cases with known suspects: they create a uniquely cruel type of limbo. The world wants closure. Headlines move on. The legal system boxes up the case and labels it solved. But to the people left behind, the most essential part is still missing: a place to bury their daughter, a place to mourn. This case also revealed a tension in our justice system. Can you secure justice without physical evidence of death? Can you convict a man of murder when no body has been found? In Danielle's case, the answer was yes. Galloway is now facing a murder trial, and prosecutors are confident they have enough to convict. But the victory is hollow without resolution. The most important piece, the woman herself, remains lost. Even as technology advances, even as cold case units grow more sophisticated, some disappearances feel like they exist outside the rules. Danielle's is one of them. There are timelines. There are suspects. There's even DNA. And yet, the most obvious question still has no answer. She left work like any normal day. She walked through a parking lot. She vanished. That's it. And if you think that level of suddenness is rare, you haven't heard what happened in the small town of Morenci, where 3 young brothers went missing on Thanksgiving weekend, and the trail didn't just go cold. It was scorched clean. Andrew Skelton, 2010, Morenci. Thanksgiving weekend is supposed to be about comfort. Family, turkey leftovers, football humming in the background while kids run around the living room. But in 2010, in the quiet town of Morenci, Michigan, that tradition was torn apart. 3 young brothers, Andrew, Alexander, and Tanner Skelton, were spending the holiday with their father, John Skelton. By the time the weekend was over, all 3 boys were gone, vanished. And the explanations offered up were not just contradictory, they were impossible. Let's start with Andrew, the oldest at 9. Sharp kid, protective older brother. On the 25th of November, he was last seen playing in the backyard of his father's modest home. There were photos taken that day, family snapshots frozen in time. But the next morning, when their mother Tanya Zuvers arrived to pick them up, the house was empty. The boys weren't there. And what their father said next kicked off one of the most haunting investigations in Michigan history. John Skelton claimed he had given the boys to an underground group to protect them from alleged abuse. But there was no group, no handoff, no records, no surveillance footage, no vehicle descriptions. Just a fog of lies that shifted every time authorities pushed for answers. One minute, he was saying he gave the boys to a woman named Joanne Taylor, someone no one could locate. The next, he said they were taken by an organization that helps abused children disappear into new lives. Then, he reversed course entirely and claimed he'd lied to protect Tanya, the boy's mother. The story kept changing. The boys never came back. Let's stop right here, because this is where the line between disappearance and enigma gets crossed. Every trace of the Skelton brothers ended that morning. No camera caught them leaving. No neighbors saw anything strange. There were no reports of strange vehicles, no credible sightings. Police analyzed computer data, cell records, GPS, nothing concrete emerged. It was as if the boys had been lifted straight out of the timeline. But what made it worse, what made this case truly extreme, was the way it stretched time like taffy. At first, there was hope. Maybe they were hidden. Maybe they were alive somewhere under new names, protected by some rogue savior group. It's happened before, right? But days turned to weeks, weeks to years, and still no sign. Andrew, being the eldest, was often the emotional anchor in this trio, the one who might have remembered a phone number, a landmark, a way home. His disappearance hits like a double loss, both the child and the one who might have helped bring the others back. John Skelton was eventually convicted not for murder, but for unlawful imprisonment. He's still behind bars today, serving a sentence that keeps being extended every time parole is denied. In interviews, he plays coy, drops vague hints. Sometimes, he seems on the verge of revealing something real. Then he clams up. It's like he's trying to turn grief into currency. Authorities have made it clear they don't believe the boys are alive. In 2020, on the 10-year anniversary, Michigan State Police openly declared the investigation a presumed homicide. But legally, the case remains a missing person file, technically unsolved, because there's no crime scene, no forensic evidence, no bodies. And that's what makes this case feel so cosmic in its cruelty. It's the kind of story that eats up theories like firewood. Every few months, another possible sighting goes viral, another tip gets phoned in, another hope is raised, then crushed, and all the while, photos of Andrew, frozen in time at age 9, circulate like ghost signals from a world that no longer exists. His room remained untouched for years. His toys, his drawings, his favorite snacks in the cupboard. These details, the ordinary ones, are what hurt the most, because they're so normal. And that normalcy sits in violent contrast with what came after. A void so total it defies language. This isn't just about one boy, it's about 3. But Andrew was the big brother, the one who would have walked the others through it. The one who, in a better story, would have come home first, with a worn-out story and a new scar, ready to tell the world where they'd been. Instead, we're left with a single sentence that echoes down the years. I gave them to someone to protect them. That someone never stepped forward, and John Skelton never gave up the truth. But we're not done with this story yet, because where Andrew went, so too went his brother, the middle child, Alexander Skelton, a kid with his own name, his own smile, and his own mystery. Alexander Skelton, 2010, Morenci. If Andrew was the big brother with the quiet strength, Alexander, just 7 years old, was the spirited one. The kind of kid whose laugh carried through rooms, a little spark, a middle child who balanced the family dynamic like it was second nature. But in Morenci, Michigan, on Thanksgiving weekend in 2010, Alexander Skelton didn't just vanish. He was pulled into a vortex of contradictions, secrecy, and heartbreak that remains one of the most unsettling cold cases in the state. When Alexander and his brothers were dropped off with their father, John Skelton, it was supposed to be a routine holiday visit. Their mother, Tanya Zuvers, had custody. The boys knew the drill. A few days with Dad, then back to school, back to their lives. No drama, no surprises. But John had other plans, plans he would never fully explain. Because by the morning of the 26th of November, all 3 Skelton boys were gone. Not just missing, removed, lifted out of existence. Alexander's story runs alongside Andrew's in every timeline. They were seen together in the backyard. They ate meals. They slept under the same roof. But when the thread of the case starts to unravel, Alexander's presence becomes increasingly spectral. There's no evidence of him leaving, No recorded steps beyond that final Thanksgiving morning. Just a deepening silence where a child used to be. Let's break that silence for a moment. Alexander Skelton had a favorite superhero, Spider-Man. He loved the color green. He was the kind of kid who asked a lot of questions, always curious, always in motion. He was smaller than Andrew, but not quieter. In many ways, he was the emotional bridge between his older and younger brothers. The one who laughed the loudest. The one who could make either sibling smile in the middle of a meltdown. And that's the tragedy buried beneath the headlines. Alexander was a full person, not just part of a trio, not just a face in a row of missing posters. He had thoughts, habits, dreams. But those details got swallowed by the scope of the case, the sheer weight of it. Because when three boys disappear at once, their identities start to blend in the public mind. They become the Skelton brothers. A unit, a mystery. But Alexander wasn't a unit. He was a boy. In the months that followed the disappearance, investigators chased every angle. They searched nearby forests, drainage ditches, abandoned buildings, farmland. Each time, they hoped to find a clue. Any clue that might help isolate the boys' movements. A footprint, a piece of clothing, but nothing was found, not even a fragment. John Skelton's explanation that he gave his sons to a secret organization to protect them was not just bizarre. It was an insult to the very real panic unfolding around him. Authorities debunked the story within days. There was no underground sanctuary, no protective handoff. It was fiction, designed, perhaps, to distract, delay, or deceive. Even now, 15 years later, John sits behind bars and insists that the boys are safe somewhere out there, under different names. But if that were true, wouldn't they have surfaced by now? Wouldn't Alexander, so full of questions and energy, have asked one too many and let something slip? Instead, what we have is a growing body of evidence that points not to relocation but to finality. In 2020, Michigan State Police officially declared the case a homicide investigation. That decision was not made lightly. It came after years of interviews, digital analysis, behavioral profiling, and exhaustive ground searches. And while there's still no physical evidence, the timeline leaves little room for optimism. What's perhaps most haunting is how clean the disappearance was. No noise, no chaos. Just an entire future erased in the time it takes to pour a cup of coffee. That level of planning or randomness is what makes this case so baffling. It feels both deeply personal and chillingly impersonal. In the years since, the community has tried to keep the boys' memories alive. Annual vigils, memorials, social media campaigns. But for all the attention, the reality remains. Alexander's last known moments are locked behind a wall of silence. There are photographs, of course. One shows Alexander wearing a hoodie, grinning at the camera, eyes wide and full of mischief. It's hard not to linger on that image, to wonder where that kid went. To wonder if he's still somewhere older now, confused, remembering a life that doesn't quite add up. But if he's out there, he hasn't spoken. And if he's not, if the worst is true, then justice has yet to be served. And as Alexander's mystery lingers in the static of unsolved history, there's still one more voice missing from the trio. Tanner, the youngest, the baby brother. A child whose story isn't just short, it's a sentence cut off mid-word. Tanner Skelton, 2010, Morenci. He was 5. Just 5. Tanner Lucas Skelton was the youngest of the 3 missing Skelton brothers, the baby of the family, the one with chubby cheeks and a mop of light brown hair that always seemed slightly out of place. If Andrew was the responsible one, and Alexander the firecracker, Tanner was the heart, the quiet, sweet gravity that held his big brothers together. He loved toy trucks and cartoons, and being part of whatever game his brothers had invented in the backyard. He had no idea that Thanksgiving 2010 would be his last known day in the world. The heartbreaking truth is that Tanner's life ended or was stolen just as it was beginning. 5 years old, no sense of danger, no reason to be afraid. The kind of child who probably still asked to hold someone's hand when he crossed the street. And yet, on the 26th of November, just like Andrew and Alexander, he vanished. No one saw him go. No one saw any of the boys go. No one heard screams or tires screeching. No alarms were raised until the next morning when their mother, Tanya Zuvers, arrived to pick them up from her ex-husband John Skelton's house and found no children, only excuses. The man she had once trusted enough to share a home and raise children with was suddenly muttering things about protective groups and hidden organizations, about people who would take care of them. Tanner had just turned 5 a few months earlier. He was in preschool. He still had trouble tying his shoes. He was the kid who made paper turkeys with handprints and who laughed when he said words wrong. His world was small home, school, mom, brothers, cartoons before bedtime. But the moment John Skelton shut that door behind him on Thanksgiving night, Tanner's world ended. Not in a dramatic, televised way, not in the kind of way that usually makes headlines, but in a terrifying, invisible one, a total erasure. No one has seen him since. Investigators believe the boys never left that house alive. There were no confirmed sightings after Thanksgiving morning. No traffic camera footage, no neighbors recalling any strange movement. The Skelton home, just a modest one-story structure on a residential street, held its secrets tightly, and Tanner, the smallest and most defenseless of the three, became the most tragic symbol of what was lost. When the investigation launched, the town of Morenci mobilized. Hundreds of volunteers joined searches. Drones flew overhead. Ground-penetrating radar scanned nearby fields. Divers checked ponds and lakes, but not a single clue emerged. The scale of the mystery was so complete, it felt theatrical. Too clean, too planned. And yet, also deeply chaotic, like a desperate act carried out under emotional fog. John Skelton's ever-changing story only deepened the dread. He claimed he gave the boys to an underground group to keep them from harm. Later, he said he gave them away to prevent them from being returned to what he described as an abusive home. Authorities debunked these stories repeatedly. Not one shred of evidence supports them. Tanner's story, though rarely told alone, deserves its own space, because what makes his case particularly chilling is his innocence. At 5 years old, Tanner wouldn't have understood custody battles, emotional manipulation, or legal threats. He didn't grasp betrayal or danger in the way adults do. He would have looked at his father and still seen safety, trust, maybe even heroism. And that's what makes the loss feel especially brutal, because it was a breach of sacred trust, not just legally, but spiritually. A child who looked up at someone he loved without knowing what that person was capable of. As years passed, Tanner's photos started to feel like something out of time. His image frozen in early childhood, a bowl-cut haircut, a beaming smile. Age progression sketches have been released, showing what he might look like at 10, 12, 15. But those images only emphasize the distance between who he was and who he might have become, the space between potential and reality. Despite repeated parole hearings, John Skelton has never told the full truth. He hints, dodges, sometimes shows signs of remorse, then doubles back. He has claimed the boys are safe, that he did what was necessary, but even if that were true, he refuses to give even the smallest piece of proof, no address, no photo, no confirmation. The state of Michigan has made its position clear. The case is now considered a homicide investigation. Not missing, not kidnapped, not in hiding. Homicide. And that word, no matter how carefully it's used, is a blade that cuts through all the hopeful silence. It confirms what many feared from the start, that Tanner, along with his brothers, may never come home. But still, every November, Candles are lit, photos are posted, stories are told, and among the faces on those posters, it's Tanner's that feels the most crushing. Because at 5, he was just learning the alphabet, just beginning to form memories, just becoming a person. And in a single weekend, all of that was taken. Yet, even as this case seems impossibly dark, it isn't the only Michigan mystery to challenge the limits of logic. Because the next disappearance didn't involve 3 brothers but 1 boy, 1 mother, and a mall where cameras captured everything, except him. DeJuan Sims, 1994, Livonia. On the 11th of December, 1994, just 2 weeks before Christmas, 4-year-old DeJuan Christian Sims was reported missing from Wonderland Mall in Livonia, Michigan. It was the kind of story that instantly ripples across an entire city. Tiny child, busy shopping center, panicked parent. Within hours, local news stations had DeJuan's photo up. A wide-eyed boy with a round face, big smile, and no warning label. Just gone, out of nowhere, at a mall. It had the makings of a familiar nightmare. Lost kid in a crowd, stranger danger. Maybe he wandered off. Maybe someone saw an opportunity. That's what the public expected. But what actually unfolded became one of the most chilling and controversial mysteries in the state's history. A case where the facts collapsed under their own weight. DeJuan's mother, DeJuan Sims Sr., and his wife, LaVontaine Sims, were separated at the time. LaVontaine told police she had taken her son to Wonderland Mall to shop for Christmas presents. At some point, while walking through the mall, she said DeJuan vanished. 1 minute he was there, the next gone. No scream, no struggle, no warning. The mall was immediately locked down. Police swept through stores, announcements were made over the intercom. Security guards checked every entrance, every exit, every loading dock. And yet, no one reported seeing a child matching DeJuan's description walking alone, crying, or being led away. That wasn't necessarily unusual. Kids can disappear quickly in crowded spaces. But when detectives reviewed surveillance footage from that day, things took a turn. DeJuan Sims did not appear in any of it. Not on the entrance cameras, not in the food court, not walking past storefronts. LaVontaine Sims was there, but her son wasn't found. Not once. No image of DeJuan at the mall that day has ever been recovered. It was the kind of detail that freezes the blood, because it means one of 2 things. Either every camera missed him, or he was never there. Police quickly changed gears. This was no longer just a missing person case, it was an investigation into a timeline that didn't add up. LaVontaine was questioned again and again. She insisted that she brought DeJuan to the mall. She said he was wearing blue sweatpants and a Batman shirt. She remembered him playing with the interactive displays in the electronics store. But with no footage, no eyewitnesses, and no physical evidence, investigators were left chasing a vanishing point that might not have existed. They tried everything. Composite sketches were released. Tips came in from across the country. Livonia police worked with the FBI, canvassed neighborhoods, interviewed friends, neighbors, family members. No arrests were made, no charges were filed, but the shadow hanging over the story only deepened. Public perception began to fracture. People wanted to believe LaVontaine. She was a mother in grief, devastated, facing the unimaginable. But that surveillance gap, those missing frames turned belief into suspicion, and suspicion into a wall that's never come down. In later interviews, LaVontaine admitted to inconsistencies in her initial statements. She changed certain details, clarified timelines. Some interpreted this as evidence of deception. Others chalked it up to trauma. After all, memory is fluid under stress, especially during a crisis involving a child. Still, the doubts grew. Despite the shifting focus, police never officially named LaVontaine as a suspect, nor did they rule her out. The case hovered in limbo. In the years that followed, leads continued to trickle in. A man came forward in 2020, believing he might be DeJuan, now grown up, A DNA test was performed. It wasn't him. And yet, the idea stuck, that Dewan might still be out there, alive, raised by someone else, unaware of who he really is. That flicker of possibility keeps people talking, keeps the posters up, keeps his name in the air. But what makes Dewan Sims's case especially haunting is how it distorts the boundary between belief and doubt. He didn't disappear in the woods, or the wilderness, or at night. He disappeared at a mall. In December, in plain sight. Or so we thought. Today, Wonderland Mall is gone. Demolished. Replaced by a Costco and strip malls. The echoes of that December afternoon have been buried under pavement and parking lots, but the story still lingers. A mother with an unproven story. A child who might never have been there. A name that won't be forgotten. Dewan's face, captured in those early family photos, continues to haunt cold case boards across the state. Because whether he's gone forever or still alive under another name, the mystery remains absolute. It's not just a question of where he went, it's whether he was ever seen at all. And while Dewan Sims's case shattered the illusion of public safety in broad daylight, the next mystery would go one step further, because it wasn't just one teen girl who vanished. It was two, on the same day, in the same small town, on Halloween, and no one has ever found out why. 7 disappearances deep, and the pattern's only getting darker. If you're feeling that chill in your spine, make sure you're subscribed. We've got so much more coming. And hey, where are you watching from? And what time is it right now? Drop it in the comments. These stories, they tend to land hardest when the clock hits strange hours. Patricia Spencer, 1969, Oscoda. The 31st of October, 1969. Halloween night. A time for masks, laughter, candy, and mischief. In Oscoda, Michigan, a small town stretched along the banks of Lake Huron, teens were gearing up for a night of costume parties and high school dances. But for Patricia Spencer, 17 years old and full of plans, that evening would be her last known walk into town. She never came back, and she wasn't alone. Her friend Pamela Hobley, just 15, disappeared with her. Together, they stepped out into the cool autumn air, headed for the high school. Some reports say they planned to attend the homecoming football game. Others suggest they might have been heading to a Halloween party. What's agreed upon is this. Patricia and Pamela were seen walking along River Road around 7 p.m. After that, the world swallowed them. No one saw them at the game. No one remembers them at the party. No one knows if they ever made it past that stretch of road. Just 2 teenage girls walking into the night. And then, nothing. But let's focus on Patricia for now. She was 17, blonde hair, warm smile, the kind of teenager who rode the line between independence and still being someone's daughter. Patricia was known to be sociable, a bit rebellious, but not reckless. She had no history of running away, no signs of deep trouble at home. She didn't pack a bag. She didn't leave a note. She simply left her house in costume and vanished. The following day, when both girls failed to return home, their families reported them missing. At first, the assumption was classic 1962nd small-town thinking. They must have run away. Maybe gone to Detroit, or crossed state lines with some boys. Maybe they'd be back in a few days. But the days turned into weeks, then months. Still no word, no calls, no sightings. Police hesitated. The runaway theory held weight in the early investigation, a delay that would come back to haunt everyone. No Amber Alert, no immediate ground search. And in a town as small as Oscoda, it didn't take long for the initial leads to evaporate. Patricia's family knew something was wrong. She hadn't taken her purse, her records, anything meaningful. Halloween came and went, and the next holiday passed, and the phone never rang. No letters arrived. Patricia, in all her teenage boldness and charm, didn't leave behind a single breadcrumb. Years turned into decades. Her photo aged poorly because how do you age a smile that never got to grow old? Tips came in now and then, some more serious than others. One witness claimed to have seen the girls getting into a car that night. Others thought they heard rumors of a party that ended badly, but nothing ever stuck. Nothing turned into a lead that made the case break open. In the early 2002, interest in the case was renewed when cold case units started re-examining long unsolved disappearances. Patricia's case was one of them. New technologies brought new hope: DNA analysis, forensic mapping, even age progression imaging. But the deeper they looked, the more they found silence. No confirmed trace of Patricia or Pamela has ever been found. No remains, no belongings, just a yawning gap in a town's memory. What makes this case so extreme isn't just its age, it's the eerie symmetry of it. Two girls, walking side by side, two families forever locked in grief. And yet, despite the dual nature of their disappearance, not one clue has surfaced that explains even a fraction of what happened. Some believe the girls may have accepted a ride from someone they trusted, or someone they thought they could trust. Others think they may have witnessed something they weren't supposed to. A few whisper about buried secrets in the woods surrounding Oscoda. But after more than 5 decades, the possibilities are infinite and the answers remain at zero. Even their high school, which once pulsed with the energy of Halloween night, has since faded into a backdrop of what-ifs. Alumni reunions still include their names. Town Facebook groups bring them up each October. And every so often, a new generation discovers their story, stunned by how cleanly the mystery swallowed them. Patricia Spencer deserved more than an ending that evaporated in the cold. She deserved to grow up, to graduate, to fall in and out of love, to become a memory maker, not a missing poster. And the worst part? She wasn't even alone. Because right beside her on that October evening was Pamela Hobley, equally young, equally vibrant, and just as missing. Pamela Hobley, 1969, Oscoda. 15 years old. That delicate age balanced between childhood and everything after. Pamela Hobley wasn't yet old enough to drive, vote, or graduate. But she was old enough to disappear utterly, permanently on a chilly Halloween night in 1969, along with her friend Patricia Spencer. Pamela had dreams, like any teen. She wanted to become a legal secretary. She was studious, reliable, and always home by curfew. She was the kind of teenager whose name wouldn't raise eyebrows. Not a troublemaker, not someone you'd expect to vanish without a trace. And yet, she did. In a case that would freeze in time, becoming one of Michigan's most enduring cold cases. Let's back up. Pamela Hobley lived in Oscoda, a quiet town on the northeastern shoreline of Michigan's Lower Peninsula, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. She had told her mother she was heading to the high school for the homecoming football game. There were murmurs later that she may have planned to attend a Halloween party afterward. It wasn't unusual. She and Patricia were often seen together, walking through town, sharing secrets, making plans. That night, they were spotted on River Road, just outside town, walking toward the high school around 7 p.m. Then, like the flick of a switch, they were gone. When Pamela didn't come home that night, her family was immediately alarmed. Unlike Patricia, who was known to have a slightly more rebellious streak, Pamela's absence was profoundly out of character. Her family filed a missing person report without delay. And in those early days, local police leaned on a theory that has since become one of the most tragically common in missing teen cases. They ran away. Except there was no evidence of that. No packed bags, no plans, no confessions to friends, no money taken, and perhaps most telling, no contact ever again. Not on holidays, not on birthdays, not even anonymously. For 2 girls to run away and then never reappear, not even as a blip in the world of social security records, job databases, or credit reports. It doesn't happen. Not like this. Decades later, when cold case investigators reviewed the file, they found the same void. No solid leads, no recovered clothing, no bones. Just a handful of old theories and the enduring frustration of not knowing. Pamela's family never gave up. Year after year, her name was spoken aloud at memorial events, vigils, and in online forums dedicated to the missing. Her mother passed away without ever knowing what happened. Her siblings carried the weight, and every Halloween in Oscoda, there's a ghost that walks beside the trick-or-treaters. Not supernatural, but real, etched into the town's history like a scar. Some theories have gained more traction than others. One involves a potential ride the girls may have accepted. Some locals believe the two were picked up by someone they knew, someone who meant them harm. Others speculate about a group of boys who had a reputation for trouble around that time. But these are shadows. No names, no confessions. Just stories that drift through the decades. Impossible to prove, impossible to forget. There's also the fact that Oscoda wasn't exactly a crime hub in 1969. It was quiet, isolated. That isolation, though, cuts both ways. In a big city, someone would have seen something. But in a place like Oscoda, silence is easier to maintain. Roads are surrounded by dense woods. Rivers run quiet. Secrets can be buried and left undisturbed for lifetimes. Over the years, police have returned to the case with new tools. Cadaver dogs, soil testing, ground-penetrating radar. In 2010, authorities followed a promising tip that led them to excavate a small field. They found animal bones, nothing more. The frustrating reality is that Pamela Hobley's disappearance remains one of those cases where the absence of evidence is the evidence. No one saw her leave Oscoda. No one saw her after 7 p.m. on Halloween night. And yet, the town remembers her. Not because she did anything loud or dangerous, but because she was ordinary. A quiet, good kid who vanished. If there's one moment in this mystery that still stings, it's the missed opportunity. Had investigators treated the case with more urgency in those first 48 hours, who knows what might have surfaced. But in 1969, when 2 teenage girls disappeared, it was easier, more convenient, to believe they had just run off. That mistake, assuming silence meant consent, cost both families a lifetime of unanswered questions. And Pamela? She deserved a chance to graduate, to get her first job, to live out the future she was planning. Instead, her name remains etched next to Patricia's on memorials, their stories forever bound not just by friendship, but by the fact that they walked into a Halloween night together and never came out the other side. But if their story was silence wrapped in uncertainty, the next missing person case turned suddenly and sharply into an all-out search that began with a girl stepping out of a school gym and vanishing into thin air. Deanie Marie Peters, 1981, Kentwood. The 5th of February, 1981. It was an ordinary Thursday afternoon in Kentwood, Michigan, a suburb just outside Grand Rapids. The temperature hovered just below freezing, a little gray, a little quiet. But inside Forest Hills Central Middle School, the hallways echoed with post-practice chatter and the screech of sneakers. This was the kind of place where routines ran deep, where kids knew when the bell rang, where to go, and who'd be waiting to pick them up. For one 4-year-old Deanie Marie Peters, known to friends and family as Deanie, the routine was familiar. And then, it wasn't. That day, Deanie had accompanied her mother and younger brother to the school for a wrestling meet. Her brother was on the team. Her mom was in the stands. Deanie, dressed in a white sweater and a long tan coat, had told her mother she wasn't feeling well and wanted to wait in the lobby. It was around 5:15 p.m. That was the last confirmed moment anyone saw her. In a matter of minutes, Deanie stepped out of the gymnasium, walked down a hallway, and vanished. No one saw her leave the building. No one saw her outside. No one remembers hearing anything unusual. But when her mother came out to check on her, she was gone. Her coat, her purse, everything was missing, and what started as confusion quickly curdled into full-scale panic. The police were called almost immediately. Unlike many missing teen cases of the era, Deanie's disappearance wasn't brushed off as a runaway. Her mother knew. The school knew. Everyone knew something was wrong. Deanie wasn't impulsive. She had no known issues at home, no history of trying to leave. She was soft-spoken, reliable, and careful. If she had gone somewhere, she would have told someone. That night, law enforcement began combing the school and surrounding grounds. Nothing. No sign of struggle, no suspicious vehicles, no witnesses. Just an echoing absence that seemed almost surgical in its precision. She walked into a hallway and then didn't exist in the next frame. The mystery deepened quickly. Tips came in, but none led anywhere solid. One theory floated early was that she had slipped away voluntarily to meet someone. But who and why? No evidence supported it. Another theory suggested abduction by a stranger, but that also made little sense in a populated school just minutes after practice ended, with dozens of people around. In the years that followed, more complicated theories emerged. Some pointed fingers at individuals within the school community, people who may have seen or heard more than they let on. Others suggested that the area surrounding the school, wooded in parts, with access to nearby roads, could have provided an opportunity for someone to whisk her away without being noticed. But again, there were no signs, no footprints in the snow, no tire marks, no trail. Investigators interviewed classmates, teachers, coaches. They checked phone records, if you can even call them that in 1981. They searched nearby fields and woods. Every tip was followed. Every lead exhausted. But Deanie was simply gone. Over time, the case evolved from a mystery into a legend. The school became haunted by her absence. Students whispered about her. Lockers bore stickers in her memory, and new generations were told not just who she was, but who she might have become. And that's perhaps the most heartbreaking part. Deanie wasn't just lost in time, she was frozen in it. The 4-year-old with long hair and soft eyes never got to grow up, never got to reclaim her name from the missing posters. Her mother, Mary Peters, never gave up. Year after year, she pushed for answers. She called news stations. She petitioned law enforcement. She kept Deanie's story alive, even as other cases overtook the headlines. Her determination became a case study in what it means to grieve without closure. Never quite mourning, never quite hoping, just waiting. In the early 2002, renewed interest in cold cases led authorities to reopen Deanie's file. A tip led them to a shallow grave in a wooded area near the school, but the excavation revealed nothing. Another ghost lead, another cruel twist. In 2020, the Kent County Sheriff's Department announced that they still considered the case open and active, that there were still persons of interest, still questions unanswered, but no charges. No confessions, no final word. What sets Deanie Peters' case apart isn't just how little evidence there was, it's how precise the disappearance seemed. A public space, a populated building, and yet no one saw her go. It's as if the floor opened up beneath her and sealed itself shut without a sound. She wasn't the type to disappear, but the world made room for her absence anyway. And, as her name continues to hang in the air like a question without punctuation, the next mystery brings us even deeper into the shadows of suburban Michigan, where another teenage girl made one final phone call from a friend's house and was never heard from again. Kimberly King, 1979, Warren. On the surface, the story begins simply. The 15th of September, 1979, Warren, Michigan. Suburbia, sleepovers, backyards, rotary phones. It was a Saturday night, and 2-year-old Kimberly King was staying at her best friend's house on Stevens Road. The plan was familiar. Hang out, tell ghost stories, eat junk food, fall asleep to the buzz of late-night television. Only Kim never came home. At 11:30 p.m., she made a phone call to her older sister. That part is verified. She told her sister she was lying in a sleeping bag on the back porch. She wanted to say goodnight. She sounded normal, happy. She was supposed to return home the next day, the 16th of September. But she didn't. And from that moment forward, Kimberly King entered the long corridor of missing children whose disappearances feel too clean, too quiet, too fast to explain. Because the details don't point to chaos. They point to a precision that feels manufactured, which is terrifying in its own right. When her friend and the friend's mother woke up the next morning, Kim was gone. Not in the house, not on the porch, no note, no sign of where she had gone. At first, people thought maybe she had decided to walk home early. It wasn't far, just a few blocks to her grandparents' house where she lived part-time. Maybe she got up before dawn and made the trip. But Kim never arrived. Her bed was untouched. Her grandparents hadn't seen her. Panic settled in slowly, then all at once. Police were called, and the search began. At first, the assumption, like so many cases in the 1972nd, was that Kimberly had run away. It was practically protocol back then. A girl disappears, assume she left on her own. Give it time. Wait. Maybe she's with a friend. Maybe she'll call. She didn't. And the days ticked by. Investigators canvassed the neighborhood, re-interviewed the family, searched nearby woods and empty lots, but no one remembered seeing Kim after that phone call. No one reported suspicious activity on the street that night. No vehicles, no strangers, nothing. In other words, she vanished in a quiet, residential neighborhood, while surrounded by people who should have heard something. But they didn't. Kim's case started attracting more attention when patterns began to emerge, patterns law enforcement didn't immediately connect. In the late 1972nd, the Detroit suburbs were dealing with a rash of child abductions. The most notorious was the Oakland County child killer, an unidentified suspect who abducted and murdered at least 4 children between 1976 and 1977. Though Kim disappeared 2 years after the last known OCCK case, some believe she may have been a later unconfirmed victim. One former prosecutor even called her a probable connection. But without evidence, without a body, there was no way to confirm. There was another theory, even more chilling. Decades after Kim disappeared, a convicted predator from the area already serving life in prison for the murder of another girl was investigated in connection with Kim's case. For a while, it looked like a break was coming. The man reportedly had connections to the neighborhood where she vanished. He may have known her. Investigators even conducted multiple digs at properties linked to him, including a backyard in Macomb Township in 2018. They brought in cadaver dogs, ground-penetrating radar, forensic experts. They found bones. Animal bones. Kim wasn't there. And once again, the story collapsed back into silence. What's especially frustrating about Kim King's disappearance is that her case feels like it should be solvable. The timeline is tight, the location is specific. She was last seen heard, really at a precise time. And yet, the mystery has held firm, like concrete that hardened too fast. Her family has spent decades living in the in-between, not grieving, not hoping, just suspended in a question mark. The porch she slept on is long gone. The house has changed owners. The people on the block have moved on, but her name still echoes in the neighborhood, especially among those who were children themselves back then. Kids who suddenly realized that monsters didn't just live under the bed. Sometimes they pulled up quietly in the middle of the night, under the cover of a safe street and familiar voices. Kim King's case serves as a brutal reminder that even in the safest places, even in a friend's house, on a sleepy street in a normal town, a child can vanish, and the world might never notice in time. And as her story continues to haunt cold case investigators and her family waits for answers that never arrive, we move next to another Michigan mystery, this one set inside a bustling suburban mall. On a weekday afternoon, a girl steps into a store. Then she's gone, and the only thing left behind is silence. Kelly Ann Brownlee, 1982, Novi. It was Memorial Day weekend, 1982, the unofficial start of summer. Malls were packed, teens were out. The sun hung a little longer in the sky, and everything had that unmistakable energy, freedom, fun, distraction. For one 7-year-old Kelly Ann Brownlee, the 12 Oaks Mall in Novi, Michigan, was just another familiar backdrop. She had started a new job at the mall's cafeteria. It was her second day. She never made it to her third. The story starts in the most ordinary way possible. Kelly arrived for her shift that Saturday afternoon, dressed in her uniform, ready to clock in. She was seen by coworkers. She chatted with friends. She went on break around 5:30 p.m., telling someone she planned to grab a bite to eat. It was the kind of moment you'd never notice until it becomes the last one. After that break, no one saw her again. At first, it didn't set off alarm bells. This was the early 82nd after all. No cell phones, no instant check-ins. When a teenager didn't return right away, people assumed she was with friends or had caught a ride home. But by the next morning, when Kelly hadn't shown up at home and her mother still hadn't heard from her, the fear set in. Her mother reported her missing. Police launched an investigation, and what they discovered wasn't comforting. Kelly's uniform was found in the mall cafeteria's locker area. Her purse and personal items were missing. There was no sign of a struggle, no witnesses, no cameras. It was as if she had walked out of the break room and into thin air. But this disappearance wasn't random. Investigators quickly began to suspect a man named Gerald Stano, a serial predator already convicted in multiple states for a string of attacks and murders targeting young women. Stano had allegedly confessed to Kelly's murder, describing details of the mall and how he lured her away. But like many of his confessions, the story was slippery, inconsistent. He later recanted. And even more frustrating, there was no body, no physical evidence tying him to Kelly's disappearance, just a jailhouse confession surrounded by doubt. In cases like this, confessions are currency. But without something tangible, something undeniable, they don't buy justice. And Kelly's case fell into that void. What makes her disappearance especially haunting is the geography of it. The 12 Oaks Mall wasn't some obscure location. It was one of the largest and most heavily trafficked shopping centers in the state. It had dozens of stores, packed parking lots, security guards, and people everywhere. And yet, on a busy weekend, in a bustling public place, a 7-year-old girl was taken and no one saw a thing. That's not just chilling, that's terrifying. Over the years, her case was reopened several times. Cold case detectives pored over files. New tips came in, but none of them broke it open. Some believed Kelly may have left with someone she knew. Others leaned toward the stranger abduction theory. There were even rumors that a local man, once accused in another missing person case, might have had something to do with it. But again, no evidence ever surfaced. The Michigan State Police continue to list her as an open case. Her name still appears on national missing person databases. Her family never stopped looking. Her mother, in particular, remained vocal, attending vigils, speaking at cold case events, pushing for her daughter's name not to be forgotten in the haze of unsolved cases. And that's where this story hits hardest: the waiting. It's not the dramatic kind of mystery, with suspects chased down alleyways or breaking news coverage interrupting dinner. It's the slow kind. The kind where a mother keeps the same phone number for decades, just in case. The kind where you don't change your mailing address because, what if? The kind where every call from an unknown number makes your heart leap in your throat. Kelly's photo, big smile, feathered 1,982nd hair, still circulates online. Every few years, someone posts a "Do you remember this girl?" thread on social media, hoping someone might. But the silence holds. 12 Oaks Mall still stands. It's been remodeled, updated, made shiny again, but somewhere in the bones of that building, the weight of Kelly's absence still lingers. A break room that once echoed with teenage chatter is now just another forgotten hallway. And in the minds of those who knew her, that weekend never ended. It just froze. And while Kelly's case remains locked in that strange, half-lit space between rumor and evidence, the next story drags us deeper into the eerie. Because in 1970, a bright young girl in Ann Arbor left for school like any normal morning and then vanished before she even made it to class. And the strange thing? It wasn't the first time that street swallowed someone whole. Cynthia Cindy, Coon 1970, Ann Arbor. On the 20th of April, 1970, Cynthia Cindy Coon left her family's home in Ann Arbor, Michigan, carrying her books and wearing a light spring coat. She was 13 years old, a student at Forsyth Junior High, smart, shy, bright in the kind of quiet way that often goes unnoticed until it's too late. She never made it to school. The distance between her house and the school wasn't far, a walk of about a mile. She'd done it countless times before, but this particular Monday morning, something along that route changed the direction of her life permanently. Cindy simply vanished. No sightings, no witnesses, no reports of a girl in trouble or calling for help. She didn't get into an argument that morning. She wasn't grounded. She hadn't shown signs of running away. The day began like any other, and yet, by the time the final bell rang, it was clear she was gone. Her family reported her missing immediately. The police responded quickly. They searched the route from her house to the school. They knocked on doors, checked in with friends, teachers, neighbors. Her photograph began circulating, but no one had seen her, not even a fleeting glance. It was like she had stepped off the sidewalk and into another dimension. Here's where it gets even stranger. Cindy Coon's disappearance wasn't the first, nor the last, case to shroud the Ann Arbor area in dread. At the time, southeastern Michigan was already living in the shadow of a string of disturbing disappearances and unsolved crimes. Young girls were going missing and sometimes turning up, lifeless, in places too close to home. The community had begun to buckle under a wave of fear that made parents escort their children everywhere, day and night. Kids who once played outside until dusk were now rushed indoors the moment the streetlights flickered on. Cindy's case, however, broke away from the others in its sheer lack of evidence. She didn't fit the pattern. No contact before or after. No belongings left behind on the trail. It was as if the universe had blinked, and when it reopened its eyes, she was gone. Over the next several weeks, search teams combed nearby woods. Volunteers scoured trails, bridges, riversides. Helicopters were used in aerial sweeps of the area. Police conducted hundreds of interviews, but every lead ended in a blank wall. No shoe prints, no scraps of fabric, no signs of a scuffle, just pure absence. Cindy's family, desperate for answers, did what many families of the missing eventually do. They clung to possibility. Maybe she had run away. Maybe she was with someone. Maybe she would call. Maybe there was a reason. But none of those hopes came true, and the weeks turned into months. Then came the rumors. Some speculated she had been taken by someone familiar, a neighbor, a passerby. Others believed she may have been one of the earlier victims in what would later be dubbed the co-ed killer era, though the timeline and victim profile didn't quite match. At that time, serial predators had already begun to cast long shadows over college towns across Michigan, but nothing connected directly to Cindy. No physical evidence, no confessions, just fear. In the early 1972nd, new missing person protocols were only beginning to take shape. National databases didn't exist yet. Communication between jurisdictions was slow, and unless a body was found or a witness came forward, many cases like Cindy's simply faded out of the media spotlight. But not from memory. Decades later, cold case detectives took another look at the file. Advances in forensic technology allowed for the reprocessing of old evidence, but Cindy's case had nothing to reprocess. No known clothing items, no recovered belongings, just a missing persons report and a few photographs. The record was skeletal. Despite this, her story continues to haunt the Ann Arbor community. Her school held memorial events in the years that followed. Her classmates grew up, graduated, had children of their own, but never forgot the girl who didn't make it to class that day. Her parents, long since passed, never learned what happened to their daughter. And that's the darkest detail of all. There are no details, no signposts, no trail. Just a 13-year-old girl who stepped out into the morning light and was never seen again. It's the kind of mystery that defies even the structure of most cold cases. Because with nothing to investigate, investigators are left asking not who did it or where did it happen, but did anything even happen where we think it did? Cindy Kuhn is more than a missing person report. She's a symbol of how fragile the structure of everyday life can be. One moment, it's just another Monday. The next, reality fractures. And that fracture only widens in our next case, a girl who disappeared just 4 years later in the early morning hours while on her way to meet her boyfriend. A girl who stepped out onto her own street and was never seen again. Nadine Odell, 1974, Inkster. The 15th of July, 1974, Inkster, Michigan. The heat had already settled over the pavement like a wet cloth. It was the kind of summer morning where everything moved a little slower except for Nadine Odell, a 16-year-old girl with plans. She had just started the day like any other, and by 7:30 a.m., she was walking to meet her boyfriend. Not exactly a rebellious act, not even a risky one. Just a short walk through a neighborhood she knew, a route she'd taken before. She never made it. Nadine's disappearance is one of those stories that feels unassuming at first glance until you look closer and realize how many safety nets failed all at once. She was last seen leaving her house in the 3200 block of Hickory Street. Her boyfriend lived only a few blocks away. By all accounts, the route was simple, residential. Early enough in the morning that few cars were on the road, few people were out. No witnesses, no struggle, no one who remembered hearing anything unusual. Her boyfriend never saw her that day. Her family never saw her again. She was just gone. At first, police treated the case with cautious curiosity. A 16-year-old girl disappears on a walk to her boyfriend's house? Maybe she ran away. Maybe she got into a car with someone she knew. Maybe she just needed a break. But her family immediately pushed back. Nadine had no history of running away, no serious troubles at home. She hadn't taken anything with her, no bags, no extra clothes, no money. She didn't say goodbye. She hadn't shown any sign of planning anything out of the ordinary. She was, by every measure, a grounded teen with the usual hopes, drama, and growing pains. But she had no reason to vanish. It wasn't long before the Inkster Police Department realized this was serious. A full investigation began. They interviewed friends, family, neighbors. Nothing came of it. There were no phone calls. No ransom notes. No communications from Nadine. She didn't withdraw money. Didn't leave any digital trail, though, of course. This was 1974. The concept of a digital trail didn't exist yet. They canvassed the area between her house and her boyfriend's home. No footprints, no scraps of clothing, no tire tracks, no reliable witnesses. In time, the leads dried up. The interviews ended. The case slipped quietly into the gray space of unresolved history. But it never left Nadine's family. Over the years, her mother became her voice, refusing to let her story go silent. She kept Nadine's picture in the public eye, made calls to investigators, appeared on missing person broadcasts, and pushed to keep the case open. One of the most gut-wrenching realities of families of the missing is this: you have to become your own detective, your own publicist, your own advocate. Because time doesn't just fade memories, it erases urgency. In 2009, decades after Nadine vanished, there was a flicker of hope. The Michigan State Police, re-examining cold cases, made a possible connection between her disappearance and a convicted predator named Arch Sloan, an inmate already linked to other child murder investigations in the state, including possible ties to the infamous Oakland County child killer case. Sloan owned a 1,966 Pontiac Bonneville at the time Nadine disappeared, matching some witness accounts of a suspicious vehicle seen near where she was last spotted. DNA was recovered from the car, but to this day, it hasn't been matched to any known suspect in her case. The problem? No evidence has ever placed Nadine directly in that vehicle. No confirmation, just possibilities. And so the case remains in limbo, open, unsolved, haunted. What's especially terrifying about Nadine's disappearance is the simplicity of the scene. She was walking, in daylight, in her own neighborhood, doing something millions of teens do every single day. And still, she was taken swiftly, silently, permanently. That's what makes this case not just tragic, but extreme. There were no storm clouds, no warnings. Just a beautiful teenage girl walking towards someone she loved, and never arriving. It forces you to reconsider what we think safe means. If Nadine wasn't safe that morning, whoever really is. Inkster has changed since 1974. New buildings, new families, new streets. But some things linger. People still talk about the girl who vanished. Some of her childhood friends still remember her as the girl with long dark hair and a kind smile. Her name resurfaces every so often in cold case forums, in police records, in local legends, always as a question, never an answer. And while Nadine's case is a sobering reminder of how quickly someone can disappear even close to home, the next mystery takes us further west into Battle Creek, where another woman left for a walk, just like Nadine, but this time, the silence that followed felt almost surgical in its precision. Mary Denise Lands, 2004, Battle Creek. On the evening of the 12th of March, 2004, Mary Denise Lands left her apartment in Battle Creek, Michigan, for what was supposed to be a short walk, just a few blocks. She told her fiancé she was heading to her parents' home to cool off after an argument. She never made it there. In a city like Battle Creek, home of cereal factories, sleepy neighborhoods, and wide Midwestern skies, a woman going missing on foot, in broad daylight, in the middle of town, should set off alarm bells loud enough to shake the rooftops. But Mary's disappearance moved like a fog, slow, creeping, hard to grasp. Mary was 39 years old, not a runaway, not a teenager, not the kind of person likely to vanish without a ripple. She worked, she had family. She had problems like anyone else, but she wasn't the type to walk away from them. Everyone who knew her said the same thing. If Mary was upset, she might take a walk, but she always came back. This time, she didn't. According to her fiancé, Chris Pratt, Mary left their apartment around 10:30 p.m. after a heated disagreement. The plan, according to him, was that she would walk to her parents' house nearby. He said he assumed she had gotten there safely and didn't think much of it. But when Mary's parents woke up the next morning and realized she had never arrived, they knew something was wrong. The police were called, and what followed was a confusing, frustrating, and increasingly alarming investigation. Mary's cell phone, purse, and other belongings were all left behind in the apartment. Her bank account was untouched. She didn't take her car. It was clear she had left on foot, in casual clothes, expecting to return. She simply vanished between point A and point B. A walk she could have done in under 10 minutes became a missing person case with no beginning, no middle, and no end. From the start, suspicions circled around Chris Pratt, her live-in partner. By multiple accounts, their relationship was volatile. Friends and family described frequent arguments and an atmosphere of tension. Chris, for his part, was cooperative at first, then less so as time went on. He declined polygraph tests. He retained a lawyer. He moved away. But no formal charges were ever filed. There wasn't enough. And that's the haunting pattern. The evidence always felt close, never concrete. The community rallied. Mary's parents, Clifford and Anita Marshall, became tireless advocates. They organized search parties, walked wooded trails, handed out flyers, raised awareness. Clifford, in particular, became a fixture in Battle Creek's local activism scene. Part father, part investigator, part grief counselor. He refused to let the case go cold. For years, he could be found at community events, speaking her name into microphones, keeping her face on posters long after the news cycle moved on. Over the years, tips would trickle in. A shallow grave here, a sighting there, abandoned properties, wooded areas, fields on the outskirts of town, all searched, all yielding nothing. Cadaver dogs, volunteer crews, police detectives. The result was always the same. No sign of Mary. No physical evidence. No body. In 2015, the case got a shot of renewed energy. A private investigator working with Mary's family revealed that there may have been new information pointing back toward the apartment she shared with Chris Pratt. Theories swirled that something had happened that night, something violent, something that required a cover-up. And still, without a witness or a confession, the case stayed in limbo. What makes Mary's story especially chilling is how neatly it fits into real life. She wasn't in a remote location. She didn't go hiking. She didn't drive into the woods. She left a house in a residential neighborhood on a walk to her parents' home, and in the time it takes to boil a kettle, she disappeared. The street she would have walked was lined with homes, porches, neighbors, lights, and yet no one saw her. That silence, so unnatural in such a populated area, is part of what makes this case so deeply unsettling, because it suggests not just disappearance, but deliberate erasure. Mary Lanz's case remains open. It remains active. Her name is still in the system, her file still on someone's desk. Her father passed away in 2021 without the answers he fought so hard to find. But her story remains a reminder of how sometimes the biggest mysteries don't unfold in the wilderness or on desolate roads, but on your own street, right outside your own front door. And if Mary's story teaches us that people can disappear even under the glare of streetlights, the next case shows us what happens when someone vanishes not from a home or a road, but from the safety of her parents' driveway, in the bright light of morning, with no warning and no return. Venus Rose Stewart, 2010. Venus Rose Stewart was a 2-year-old mother, living a life nearly everyone believed would follow a familiar arc, raising children, stable routines, dreams quietly held close. But on the 26th of April, 2010, her quiet life fractured. She vanished. That morning, Venus walked outside her parents' home in Cologne, Michigan, to check the mail. It was a task so ordinary you hardly notice it, and yet it was the last moment she was seen alive. She never returned. What followed was a slow crescendo of dread. Her estranged husband, Douglas Harry Stewart, became the chief suspect almost immediately. Venus had left him and taken their children, citing long-standing abuse and securing a restraining order. He took that afternoon as his opportunity. In 2011, he was convicted of premeditated murder, even in the absence of a body. Prosecutors painted a picture of a planned act, bolstered by testimony from Ricky Spencer, who had posed as Doug in Virginia to provide him with an alibi. But the physical proof the body remained missing. Years passed without closure. until October 2018, more than 8 years after the disappearance. In a scene that felt almost unreal for a case once defined by absence, Doug negotiated with authorities, reportedly requesting an Xbox and other prison perks in exchange for the location of the burial site. Investigators say he'd been gradually opening up during annual prison visits, until finally, he took them to a wooded area near Fulton, Michigan. There, buried under the soil and marked with 2 tree stumps remnants, he said he placed as a reminder lay Venus's remains. The police, assisted by Western Michigan University archaeologists, confirmed the discovery of her body thanks to the changes in soil composition and the markers Doug described. In that moment, a chapter closed. A mother of 2, missing for nearly a decade, was finally found. Justice had been served, and for her children and parents, that mattered. They could say goodbye. The hole in their hearts could begin to heal. Yet, something lingers in this story, a reminder how easily normal can be dismantled. A woman heads out to retrieve mail. A husband lies in wait. A plan unfolds, and a family is shattered. Venus's case reminds us that minute decisions can have catastrophic consequences, and that even when the body is found, the emotional scar lasts far longer. Next, we pivot sharply from that quiet urgency to a disappearance marked by bloodstains, a staggering investigation, and justice served, but still, no body. It's the case of a young mom taken from her workplace. Jessica Hiringa, 2013, Norton Shores. The 26th of April, 2013. Norton Shores, Michigan. A late-night gas station. An ordinary setting turned scene of deep dread. Jessica Lynn Hiringa, 25, was a single mother working a closing shift alone at an Exxon station. By 11 p.m., the last transaction, the sale of a lighter, was recorded. Then the store went silent. Her car was found still parked. Her jacket, her purse, her cigarettes, everything she needed were untouched. But police discovered something chilling. A pool of blood outside, matched to Jessica through DNA. A gun's laser sight cover and tiny batteries lay nearby, tiny stoppers pointing to something bigger and far more deliberate. This was not a robbery. No money was taken. The scene offered no easy answers, only that Jessica had disappeared without a trace, and likely violently. In response, a massive investigation took shape. 15 agencies, 14 specialized divisions, a 75-member task force, 12,000 man-hours, 1,400 tips, 33 warrants, 20 residential searches, 12 ground sweeps, and 2 underwater dives. Still, no body, no immediate suspect. Then, pieces began to emerge. A man seen flirting with Jessica earlier that night. A silver minivan parked behind the station. A lone witness noticing it at odd hours. That van sped away on camera. It all led to Jeffrey Willis, a local man whose minivan and behavior matched descriptions. His phone records and timestamps put him at the scene. A computer search folder labeled Vix, including photos of Jessica, was found at his home. Willis was arrested, tried, and in May 2018, 5 years after Jessica vanished, found guilty of her kidnapping and murder. Life without parole followed. His cousin, Kevin Bloom, also pled no contest for helping dispose of her body and lying about the case. In 2024, ABC's 2020ths revisited the case, tracing the silver van, the chilling timeline, and connecting it to another murder and an attempted abduction, pieces that deepened the dark design behind the crime. Even with a conviction, the case remains painful. No body has ever been found. Jessica's remains are still missing. Her family received justice, but not closure. How profound and how harrowing that someone can be lost under such scrutiny and still not be found. And now, for one more turn in this sequence, let's move from a single, traumatic incident to a more intimate mystery, where someone walked away from home and never returned. The next case is Heather Kelly, who disappeared from Portage Kalamazoo in recent memory, though remains unfound. Heather Kelly, 2022. Portage, Kalamazoo. In December 2022, Heather Kelly, a mother of 8, vanished from Kalamazoo County under circumstances shocking in their stark normality. She had been living in Portage, just outside Kalamazoo, with her partner. One night, after a dispute, Heather left their home. That was the last anyone saw of her. The next day, she was reported missing. But unlike many cases, no one reported her sighted elsewhere. No activity on any of her accounts, no digital trail, no sign she had intended to vanish. The investigation quickly focused on her partner, who is now facing trial for her presumed murder even though her body has not been found. Yet the entire story is still shrouded in unanswered questions. What makes Heather's disappearance particularly haunting is the domestic context. This wasn't a stranger. It was someone close. Yet her life was erased so thoroughly, the only continued contact is in courtrooms. As with the others, her case is marked by silence, the absence of evidence that, in any other science, would be impossible. Her phone won't light up. Her presence isn't found. And every day without answers stretches the void her family endures. Stephen Earl Kraft, Jr. 2001, Benton 2P, Benton Harbor. It was a cold Monday evening, the 15th of February, 2001, when 2-year-old Stephen Earl Kraft Jr. stepped out of his home in Benton Township, Michigan, with 2 loyal companions, his dogs, Sheba and Willie. He told his family he'd be back soon. He never was. In the beginning, nothing about Stephen's evening routine was unusual. It was just after 7 p.m., and he was wearing a tan coat, gray pants, and a red shirt. A quiet kid, small for his age but sharp and friendly, Stephen was the kind of kid people liked right away. He lived with his family in a modest neighborhood and liked walking the dogs around the block after dinner. What came next was a disappearance so complete, so confounding, that investigators are still trying to untangle it over 2 decades later. When Stephen failed to return within the hour, his family grew concerned. They searched the neighborhood, called friends, retraced his usual walking routes. Still no Stephen. Just 2 dogs, one found nearby that night, the other arriving home later alone, both unharmed, but no boy. Panic followed. Local law enforcement, the FBI, and volunteer search teams launched one of the most intense child search efforts in Southwest Michigan history. They combed nearby fields, ditches, rivers, wooded areas, and abandoned buildings. Cadaver dogs were brought in. Aerial surveillance was deployed. A local landfill was even searched, just in case. They canvassed the neighborhood and circulated Stephen's photo widely. And yet, nothing. Not a single piece of clothing. Not a shoe. Not even his eyeglasses. Over time, investigators floated several theories. One was abduction. Someone in the neighborhood or passing through may have snatched him. Another suggested Stephen might have stumbled onto something he wasn't meant to see and was silenced. But there was never a suspect. No witnesses, no evidence. One detail that's never sat right with locals: both dogs came back. If Stephen had simply gotten lost, or if there had been an accident, wouldn't the dogs have stayed with him or tried to lead someone to him? Despite the lack of leads, Stephen's case has never been declared cold. His mother, Pamela Kraft, has kept his story alive, pushing for renewed searches and staying in regular contact with law enforcement. His face appears on national missing children databases, aging software projections used to show what he might look like today. Now, a man in his 32nd, frozen in time for most of us, but never for his family. As of 2025, the FBI still lists him as missing. His case has spurred legislative attention, influenced search and rescue procedures, and become a touchstone for unsolved child disappearances in the region. And the strangest part? There was never a trace, never a whisper, not even a bad lead. It's as if the world simply paused, and when it resumed, Stephen was gone, but his dogs weren't. And that lingering mystery, that incomplete logic haunts everyone who remembers that night in Benton Township. As we leave this story, the next one reaches further back in time, nearly half a century further. A first grader vanishes while walking to school, right after stopping at her grandmother's house. What makes it worse? Her case is still Michigan's oldest open missing child investigation. Danielle Marie Wells, 1958, Flint. The 21st of October, 1958. A Tuesday morning. In Flint, Michigan, 6-year-old Danielle Marie Wells left her grandmother's house, heading for elementary school just a few blocks away. She never arrived. She never came home. Danielle had made this walk before. It was part of her routine. She'd stop at her grandmother's for a quick visit, then continue the short journey to Lewis Elementary. That morning, she was wearing a white sweater and a plaid skirt, with her hair neatly tied back. But after waving goodbye at her grandmother's front steps, Danielle stepped into a gap in the world and has never been seen since. The initial response was swift. Danielle's family reported her missing within hours. Police scoured the neighborhood, every house, every alley, every park. Flyers were distributed across Genesee County. But the longer the search continued without results, the more it became clear this was no ordinary disappearance. There were no signs of a struggle, no reports of strangers nearby, no helpful witnesses. The timeline was razor thin, less than 10 minutes between when she left her grandmother's and when she should have arrived at school. But in those minutes, something irreversible happened. In the years that followed, Danielle's case grew cold, but never forgotten. It was the 1952nd, long before nationwide child alert systems, before DNA databases, before child protection infrastructure had its current shape. Danielle's photo remained on walls and bulletin boards long after the initial headlines faded. Her parents never moved away. They never gave up hope. Even decades later, retired police officers and community volunteers continued to re-examine her case. In 2008, on the 50th anniversary of her disappearance, a small memorial was held. It wasn't just to mourn, it was to remind the public that Danielle was still out there. Somewhere. Somehow. The possibility of abduction has always loomed large, especially since there was never any trace of her. Over the years, multiple suspects from other child-related crimes were examined in connection with her disappearance. None led to a break. As of 2025, Danielle's case holds the tragic distinction of being Michigan's longest-standing open missing child case. She would be in her 72nd now. Some mysteries are quiet and eerie. Danielle's is loud in its silence. A child vanishes in daylight, on a school day, in a safe neighborhood. No explanation. Just an open-ended question that refuses to close. And yet, this isn't even the only missing person case from the same year involving no body, no confession, but a conviction. Which brings us to Street Clare Shores, where one woman's disappearance sparked a murder case built entirely on absence. Bernice Charlotte Gray, 1991, Street Clare Shores. On the 26th of December, 1991, Bernice Charlotte Gray left her home in Street Clare Shores, Michigan. It was the day after Christmas. She was supposed to run errands. Instead, she never returned. Bernice, 26 years old, was a mother and a fighter. She was also in the midst of a volatile separation from her boyfriend, Robert Shane Gajewski. By most accounts, things had gotten ugly: custody battles, restraining orders, accusations. Still, she pushed forward, focused on her child, tried to build a new life. Then, she was gone. Her car was found the next day in Detroit, burned nearly beyond recognition. Investigators combed through the remains and discovered blood inside the vehicle. A lot of it. It matched Bernice's Bernician. Forensic evidence Witness testimony and circumstantial details painted a clear picture. Gajewski had lured Bernice to her car, attacked her, and disposed of her body, though it was never found. Despite the lack of a body, he was eventually charged with her murder. In a rare move, prosecutors pushed forward without physical remains. The trial was brutal. Defense attorneys insisted there was no definitive proof Bernice was dead, but the evidence was overwhelming. The blood loss, the threats, the prior abuse, the burned car, the timeline. Gajewski was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Still, for Bernice's family, justice didn't mean closure. Her remains were never recovered. No burial, no place to grieve, just the legal record and a lingering pain. Her case is a sobering example of a rare category. A murder conviction with no body. Michigan courts don't take that lightly, but they believed her story was clear. And yet, just as Bernice's absence is deeply felt by those who knew her, so too is the silence left behind by another woman who vanished under eerily similar circumstances just 1 year prior. Her name was Connie Lynn Royce, and her final night started at a bar and ended nowhere. Connie Lynn Royce, 1990, Mount Clemens. In the early hours of May 20, 1992, 5-year-old Connie Lynn Royce stepped out of a bar in Mount Clemens, Michigan, and disappeared into the night. It was a Sunday morning, the kind where streets are empty and the world hasn't quite woken up yet. The kind of silence where anything can happen and no one would know. Connie had gone out with friends that evening, unwinding at a popular local lounge called Your Place. She was last seen around 1 a.m., reportedly leaving on foot. It's unclear if she was intending to walk home, meet someone, or just get some air. What is clear, she never arrived home, never contacted friends, never picked up her last paycheck, and was never seen again. The strange part? No one remembers seeing her after she walked out that door. Not the staff, not the other patrons. And for a woman with an outgoing personality, a familiar face in town, that kind of exit feels wrong. Too quiet, too incomplete. Police initially investigated the case with a wide lens. She hadn't taken any belongings with her. Her purse, keys, and ID were unaccounted for. Her car was parked at the bar but unused. There were rumors, of course, talk of trouble in her personal life, of a possible dispute earlier that evening, of a man who may have followed her out, but none of it confirmed. Just fragments. As days turned into weeks, her family grew more desperate. Connie's mother made pleas to the media. Volunteers posted flyers across Macomb County. Tips came in, but all led to dead ends. Police even used dogs to search wooded areas and nearby water bodies, but nothing turned up. Some investigators believed she may have gotten into a vehicle with someone she knew, perhaps even someone waiting for her. Others suspected foul play from the beginning, especially given the lack of any contact and the abruptness of her disappearance. But with no body, no witnesses, and no crime scene, theories became speculation. In the decades that followed, Connie's story faded from the headlines, but not from the hearts of those who loved her. Her family kept a low but steady profile, never letting the case go completely cold. Occasionally, new leads would surface, prompting fresh searches or renewed interviews, but they all ended the same way, in silence. And that's what makes this case so chilling. A young woman vanished just steps from other people, from parked cars, from streetlights, from her own vehicle, and in a moment, her life was absorbed by the darkness and never returned. To this day, no arrests have been made, no remains have been recovered. Connie Lynn Royce remains a missing person, not a murder victim, not a runaway, just missing. But Mount Clemens wasn't done with disappearances in 1990. That same year, another young man left a social gathering, this time near the Detroit River, and never came back. His name was Brian Joseph Grocky. His ending is just as foggy. Brian Joseph Grocky, 1990, Trenton. On the 16th of October, 1990, 4-year-old Brian Joseph Grocky walked away from a small party in Trenton, Michigan, and vanished into thin air. His last known location? Near the banks of the Detroit River. A few drinks, a few goodbyes, then nothing. The details surrounding Brian's disappearance are blurry, and time hasn't made them any clearer. He was at a social event with friends, one of those loosely organized get-togethers where people come and go, especially in their 20s. Witnesses recall him stepping outside, possibly to cool off or take a walk, but no one saw where he went after that. When Brian didn't return home, friends weren't immediately alarmed. It wasn't uncommon for people his age to crash somewhere unexpectedly. But when he still hadn't surfaced the next day or the day after, concern hardened into fear. His family reported him missing. Police began searching the immediate area, focusing on the nearby river. It's a logical target. Swift, cold, unforgiving. Dive teams were brought in. They swept the shoreline. Boats scanned the water. Still nothing. No clothing. No phone. No wallet. No sign. Over the years, the case remained open but stagnant. Without witnesses or physical evidence, investigators struggled to even establish whether Brian had fallen into the river, met with foul play, or walked away into a new life. The latter theory never held much weight. Brian had a steady life, a job, a future. He wasn't the type to simply vanish without a word, and more importantly, he never accessed his bank accounts, contacted family, or used his ID again. There's an eerie contrast in Brian's story. The Detroit River is a vast, roaring body of water. If something had happened there, an accident, a push, a fall, it should have left a mark, some trace. But like so many others on this list, Brian left nothing behind. For his parents, the waiting never stopped. For his friends, the mystery remains a gaping hole in an otherwise ordinary memory. A night out, a step outside, and then just darkness. Today, more than 3 decades later, Brian Grocky's name still appears in the National Database of Missing Persons. His image has been age-progressed. His file remains technically active. But no one has come forward. No one has claimed to know what happened. And the river, as always, keeps its secrets. Next, we shift from the industrial shadows of the Detroit River to the rustic quiet of Sister Lakes, where another woman vanished under summer skies in the late 1972nd. No cameras, no evidence. Just the wide-open woods. And one last smile. Joyce Alice Fisher, 1978, Sister Lakes, Cass Company. The 22nd of July, 1978. Joyce Alice Fisher, age 36, was staying at a lakeside resort area in Sister Lakes, a popular summer destination nestled in the wooded regions of Cass County, Michigan. The sun was bright. Tourists were lounging. The air carried the scent of sunscreen and barbecue. It should have been a weekend like any other. Instead, it turned into a mystery that remains unsolved to this day. Joyce was last seen around the resort where she was vacationing. Reports vary on whether she left on foot or in a vehicle, but one detail is consistent. She told someone she'd be right back. She wasn't. After that moment, she was never seen again. Her disappearance was reported quickly. Local police launched a search of the nearby woods, lakes, and cabins. Boats scanned the water. K-9 units were brought in. Volunteers formed lines across hiking trails, but nothing was found. Not her clothing, not her purse, not even a footprint. What made her case even more unnerving was the location. Sister Lakes was a family spot. Kids on bikes, fishing poles, summer heat, and simple joys. It wasn't the kind of place where someone simply disappeared, and yet, Joyce did. She had no known enemies, no reason to vanish. She hadn't brought large amounts of money or made travel plans. And unlike some other cases from the era, hers didn't seem to involve foul play, at least not on the surface. But as the days passed and the leads dried up, theories began to swirl. Some believed she might have wandered into the woods and gotten lost. Others suspected a stranger, someone passing through. A few pointed to someone local, someone who might have known the terrain well enough to hide something permanently. No evidence ever surfaced. Her family held out hope for years. The resort where she disappeared changed hands. The people moved on. But Joyce's story stayed like a ghost in the lodge whispered every few summers when another guest asked about the missing woman who never came back. And in the quiet shadows of Cass County, her name still echoes. From a resort to a college town, the next disappearance also starts with something simple. Just a young man stepping out, telling his friends he'd be right back. Only he wasn't mine. And 20 years later, he still isn't. Andrew Elijah Hargrove, 2005, Ypsilanti. On the night of the 8th of February, 2005, 21-year-old Andrew Elijah Hargrove stepped outside his friend's home in Ypsilanti, Michigan, and told them something simple. "I'll be right back." No big deal. No alarm bells. He was stepping away briefly, just out for a moment. But he didn't come back. Not that night. Not ever. Andrew was a young man in transition, working, figuring things out, making plans. Ypsilanti, a small city shaped by the rhythms of nearby college life, was a familiar backdrop. The kind of place where people drift in and out of apartments and bars, where routines get blurred but never lost entirely. Except this time, something was lost. Something big. It wasn't immediately clear something had gone wrong. People assumed Andrew had stayed out, maybe gone to another friend's house, maybe walked somewhere to cool off or meet someone. But when hours stretched into days, and he didn't show up to work or answer calls, the dread began to build. Andrew's family reported him missing, and soon it became clear no one had seen him since he left that house. No traffic cams, no phone activity, no sightings. He hadn't taken a bag, hadn't withdrawn any money. His car was untouched. He had simply stepped away. Police began interviewing friends, retracing his steps, looking for patterns. Was there someone he was meeting? Was he running from something? But those theories never stuck. Nothing in his behavior suggested he wanted to vanish, and there was no evidence that someone had forced him to. It was the kind of vanishing that defies narrative logic. No signs, no answers. Over the years, friends and family have described Andrew as warm, funny, and deeply loyal. He had goals, he had struggles, but nothing suggested he would just walk out of his life. And yet here we are. His name still lives in the databases. His face still circulates in online cold case communities. His story still stirs painful conversations in Ypsilanti, but nothing new has emerged. The ground has remained stubbornly silent. And that silence echoes, especially because the next case feels eerily similar. A teenage girl in Detroit. One final step out the front door. No sign of struggle, no trace, just gone. Gary Nicole Anderson, 1990, Detroit. In 1991, 5-year-old Jerry Nicole Anderson left her home in Detroit and never returned. There was no storm, no scandal, no final argument. Just a young girl stepping out into a city she knew and disappearing from it entirely. The specifics of that day have been lost to time. Gary's last known movements are vague. She was believed to have left voluntarily, maybe going to meet someone, maybe just out for a walk. But she never came back, and she hasn't been seen since. In the beginning, like so many young black girls in the 1992nd, her disappearance didn't get the attention it deserved. There were assumptions, maybe she ran away, maybe she'd come back. Maybe it wasn't serious, but her family knew better. They pushed, they called, they posted flyers, they asked for help. And the help never came, not fast enough. Detroit was in flux during that era. Crime rates were high, neighborhoods were struggling. Gary's case quickly got buried under bigger headlines and louder emergencies. But that doesn't make it any less devastating. There were no known suspects, no recovered items, no camera footage. Just a 5-year-old girl who disappeared without a ripple. Years passed. Gary's case aged. Her name moved from active file to cold case ledger. Her family kept pushing for recognition, even as tips dried up and investigators rotated out. Her face was age progressed. Her story was recirculated. But nothing changed. Today, Gary Anderson is one of hundreds of missing Detroit teens whose cases remain open but unsolved. Her name is part of a list, one that should never have to exist. And while the lack of evidence in her case is frustrating, it's also familiar. Because the next person on our list left home for something routine, just a night of fishing along Lake Huron, and was never seen again. Joseph Michael Gutierrez, 1983, Sanborn Twup, Lake Huron. The 14th of August, 1983, Sanborn Township, Lake Huron. Joseph Michael Gutierrez was 22 years old when he told family he was going night fishing along the shoreline of Lake Huron. It was the kind of trip he'd done before, relaxing, solitary, ordinary. But this time, he didn't come back. The region along Michigan's Lake Huron shoreline is beautiful, sprawling, and once the sun sets, unnervingly quiet. Joseph was last seen preparing for his trip, and then, nothing. When he didn't return the next morning, concern quickly turned to panic. Search teams were dispatched. His car was located near the shoreline. His fishing gear was found, partially unpacked. But no sign of Joseph, no footprints beyond the ones leading toward the water. No signs of a fall, no upturned rocks, no evidence of foul play. Was it an accident? Did he slip into the water and drown? Possibly. But search crews used sonar, boats, and dive teams to scan the shoreline and the lake itself. Still, no body was recovered. No trace. It was as though the lake had erased him clean. Lake Huron is known for its size and power. People disappear in its waters every year. But something about Joseph's case never sat right. The conditions weren't particularly dangerous that night. The shoreline he was on wasn't treacherous, and he was experienced, careful, smart. It didn't add up. His family pushed for answers, but none came. Rumors floated. Did someone meet him there? Did he witness something? Was he taken? But those questions were always met with shrugs, not evidence. Today, Joseph Michael Gutierrez remains missing. Officially. Emotionally. Permanently until proven otherwise. And with that, we move from lakewater silence to a city neighborhood where a young woman left home and walked out into the world. A few hours later, the world had already moved on, and she was nowhere to be found. Robin Sue Scott, 1995, Grand Rapids. It was the 29th of March, 1995, when 4-year-old Robin Sue Scott walked out of her home in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and disappeared into the thrum of an ordinary weekday morning. No storm. No urgent errand. Just a woman stepping out, presumably heading somewhere she knew and never coming back. Robin was a mother, a daughter, a sister. She was also in the middle of reclaiming her life. Having previously struggled with personal challenges, she was taking steps forward, making plans, staying connected with her family, focusing on what came next. There was nothing dramatic about that Wednesday. She left home as she often did. Her purse was missing. So were her keys. But not much else. She was just gone. Police were notified quickly. Robin's family sensed something was wrong almost immediately. She wasn't the kind of person to disappear without checking in, especially not with her child. But, from the start, her case was a study in frustration. No signs of struggle. No signs of flight. No witnesses who recalled anything strange. It was as though the world had shifted slightly and she'd fallen through the crack. Searches followed. The Grand Rapids police canvassed the area, conducted interviews, and reviewed her contacts and recent movements. Nothing stood out. Her bank accounts were untouched. Her phone went silent. There were no transactions, no sightings, no hints. The possibility of foul play came up early. She was last believed to have been in the area of Sheldon Boulevard. Rumors suggested she may have been meeting someone or running a quick errand. But no confirmed locations were ever tied to her final steps. In the years since, Robin's name has lived in the files of Michigan's open missing person cases. Her photo, her smile, her story reduced to a single-page flyer. And yet, her family still waits. Her daughter grew up without knowing what happened to her mother. Her siblings grew older with the weight of not knowing. Every few years, law enforcement circles back. There are renewed interviews, new age-progressed photos, new digital efforts, but the story remains stuck in its original silence. And yet, Robin's case is not isolated. Grand Rapids holds other mysteries like hers, because that same year, in that same city, another young woman would vanish under nearly identical circumstances and leave behind just as many questions. Kathleen Dennis, 1995, Grand Rapids. Just 3 months after Robin Scott vanished, another 8-year-old woman, Kathleen Dennis, walked out into the Grand Rapids daylight and disappeared without a trace. It was June 1995. Warm weather, bright skies, ordinary morning. And then, nothing. Kathleen was last seen near Division Avenue. Like Robin, she had personal challenges, but she was connected to her family. She had people looking out for her, and she had no known reason to vanish. No big plans, no confessions, just the stillness that follows someone leaving a room and never returning. Her case drew comparisons almost immediately. 2 women, similar age, same city, same year, same lack of evidence, same trail of nothing. Kathleen's family raised alarms quickly. They knew something was wrong. She wasn't a flight risk. She wasn't hiding. Her clothes, Idaho, and belongings were mostly left behind. But law enforcement had nothing to work with. No final location, no camera footage, no witness testimony. It was another vanishing act in a city that was suddenly collecting them. Investigators explored every path. Was it someone targeting women in the area? Was there a serial predator? Were these cases linked? That theory surfaced more than once, but nothing stuck. No shared suspect. No confessions. No overlap beyond geography and timing. Kathleen's family, like Robin's, never gave up. They've held on to her story, even as the city has changed. Buildings have been torn down. New families moved in. But her absence remains a gap in their personal history that refuses to close. Her face still appears in missing person databases. The case is still open. Her name is still spoken at remembrance events, but her story hasn't advanced in over 2 decades. And while her disappearance is haunting on its own, the next case shifts the focus to someone even younger, someone who disappeared during the holiday season and left behind only silence, a college-aged woman. A wintry city, a December that never ended. Ange Iradukunda, 2017, Grand Rapids. In December 2017, 2 one-year-old Ange Iradukunda vanished from Grand Rapids, Michigan. She was a student, a young woman full of ambition, possibility, and kindness. And she simply disappeared. Originally from Rwanda, Ange had moved to the United States with her family to build a new life. She was attending college and working to balance education with all the responsibilities that come with adulthood. Friends described her as thoughtful, driven, and warm. She was close with her family. She wasn't the kind of person to drop out of contact. So, when her phone went unanswered and her usual routines were abandoned, her loved ones knew something had gone terribly wrong. She was last seen on foot, possibly heading toward the downtown area. It was the 26th of December, the day after Christmas. Cold, quiet, most of the city still in holiday mode, and Ange was just gone. The Grand Rapids Police Department began an investigation quickly. Search parties were formed. Flyers went up. Social media lit up with calls for information, but nothing surfaced. No one remembered seeing her. No camera caught her walking. No digital trail was left behind. It was as if the city had blinked and lost her. Her case never generated the media frenzy it deserved. As a young black woman, her story became yet another example of how certain cases fade from headlines faster than others. Her family has been vocal about this, pushing for renewed attention and calling out the disparities in missing person coverage. But attention hasn't meant answers. Years later, her case remains unsolved, her whereabouts unknown, her last moments a blur. There are no suspects, no persons of interest, no theories with traction. Just the eerie void left behind by someone who was supposed to do so much more. And with Ange's case, Grand Rapids adds another name to a growing list of Michigan mysteries, stories of people who stepped into the light of day and then into the dark of history. Next, we move from the city to a rural town, Allegan, where a man was last seen leaving a bar, climbing a fence, and disappearing into the cold night air, never to be seen again. Richard Eugene Dale Hitchcock, 1990, Allegan. The 19th of February, 1990, Allegan, Michigan, just after midnight. Richard Eugene Dale Hitchcock was last seen leaving a lounge in the city center, a regular local hangout where faces were familiar and nights bled into early mornings without much concern. He was 34 years old. Not a teenager, not a transient, a man with roots, family, responsibilities, and then nothing. What we know is this: Richard left the bar alone. Witnesses say he climbed a barbed wire fence at the edge of a parking lot near the Kalamazoo River. The reasoning behind that decision, why he chose that route, why he didn't take the sidewalk, or wait for a ride, is unclear. But that act, strange as it sounds, is the last verifiable thing anyone saw him do. From there, the trail ends. Police were contacted soon after he failed to return home. At first, there was hope he'd just wandered off, that maybe alcohol played a role, that he might resurface, embarrassed but unharmed. But those hopes faded quickly. There were no calls, no sightings, no withdrawals from his bank account, no movement at all. Search crews, including dogs and divers, scoured the surrounding areas. The river was searched, the woods nearby combed. No trace, not a shoe, not a coat, not even a set of footprints. As far as anyone could tell, Richard had walked into the cold and evaporated. Over time, the fence he climbed became a symbol, not just of a physical boundary, but of the point where reality frays. One moment, a man making his way through town. The next, a complete disappearance. His family kept asking questions, but answers never came. Theories bounced around. Did he fall into the river? Was he followed? Was it a planned disappearance? But none of them fit perfectly. His life gave no real clues. He wasn't in trouble. He wasn't talking about leaving. He had plans, people to see. Nothing suggested he was about to become a mystery. His case remains open to this day. Local police still list him as a missing person. Every few years, a tip surfaces, a bone found in a field, a sighting from a distant town, but nothing matches. Richard's story is particularly haunting because it happens in a place where people don't expect things to go missing. Small town Allegan, where everyone knows your name and your business. And yet, that night in February, Richard Hitchcock slipped through the cracks like a shadow. And from Allegan, we now move west to the outskirts of Kalamazoo, where another person vanished during an everyday moment. A community college drop-off, a husband, a wife, a woman who never made it inside. Shirley Jo Kelly, 1985, Matawan, Kalamazoo area. It was the 20th of October, 1985. 985, when 3-year-old Shirley Jo Kelly was last seen alive. Her husband says he dropped her off that morning at Kalamazoo Valley Community College, where she had classes. She never walked through the doors, never entered the building, never came home. Shirley Jo wasn't someone looking to disappear. She had 3 children, a marriage, a home. She was trying to improve her life through education. Her day began like any other. A short drive to the college from their home in Matawan. Her husband reported seeing her exit the car in the parking lot, and that was it. After that moment, Shirley vanished from the record of the world. Police interviewed students, staff, faculty. No one saw her on campus. Security confirmed she never entered any building. Her car wasn't left behind because she didn't drive that day. Her husband had the only vehicle. That detail quickly became important. When she was reported missing, suspicion naturally fell close to home. Her husband became the central focus, though no charges were ever filed. He claimed she simply walked away. But to those who knew Shirley Jo, that didn't make sense. She was dependable, focused, devoted to her kids. She wouldn't leave them behind without a word. Search teams canvassed the areas between Matawan and Kalamazoo. Helicopters scanned the wooded trails nearby. Volunteers posted flyers, but there was no trace, no clothing, no purse, no sightings. And there was something else, an absence of urgency. Media coverage at the time was minimal. There was no statewide search, no task force. Her case quietly slipped into the background. Just another adult female, possibly voluntarily missing, according to outdated assumptions. But her family never bought it. And as the years rolled on, those early investigative gaps widened into voids. Now, nearly 4 decades later, the case remains unresolved. Shirley Jo Kelly's name sits in Michigan's cold case records like a whisper rarely mentioned, but never forgotten by her children, who grew up without answers. And yet, her story isn't isolated, because not far from where Shirley disappeared, another woman, this time in broad daylight, in a city center, also vanished. Her name? Rhonda B. Beers. Rhonda B. Beers, 2001. Lansing. The 21st of March, 2001. Lansing, Michigan. Just after 10 a.m. 4-year-old Rhonda B. Beers was seen walking near the downtown area, close to South Cedar Street and Jolly Road. It was mid-morning. Bright. Public. She was wearing a jacket, had cash, and intended to run errands. Then, she was gone. Rhonda's day wasn't extraordinary. She had plans. Nothing unusual, nothing suspicious. But after that sighting, no one saw her again. Her family called police when she failed to return calls or show up where she was expected. Investigators started canvassing the area, but nothing came up. There were no signs of a struggle, no suspicious activity on security footage, no odd phone calls. Just the kind of silence that doesn't sound like silence at all, but like something being hidden. Her purse was never found. Neither was her body. Her financial accounts were untouched. Her phone inactive. She didn't have a car, and she relied on walking or public transit. But that morning, there was no indication of danger. No red flags. Over the years, family members have pushed for more investigation. They've worked with advocacy groups, tried to stir public attention, but Rhonda's case remains frustratingly static. It has never received the same public attention as other missing person cases, and no arrests have ever been made. To this day, Rhonda's file is open. Her disappearance is listed as suspicious. And her loved ones still cling to the few details they have: what she was wearing, where she was seen, and the space where she should still be. And that brings us to the end of our 33 names. A list built not on the drama of what is known, but the eerie silence of what isn't. Because what unites all these stories isn't just the mystery. It's the pattern. People across Michigan, mothers, sons, sisters, kids, vanishing in ways that leave no sense, no trace, and no peace.